Good morning. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Apple Wang. I am your host. Today we have our special guest or the series of authentic teaching and sharing with Sunyata. Knowledge. Before we getting started, let's go through the disclaimers. The purpose of Sunyata's teaching and sharing is to foster authentic spiritual understanding and knowledge, ultimately assisting individuals in achieving greater clarity of consciousness, and hence discovering methods and tools to reduce unnecessary human sufferings. The information presented is intended solely for guidance and education. It's not intended to cause any direct or indirect harm. These are personal experiences and opinions you're not obliged to agree with. Whilst Apple acknowledges the value of Sunyata's teaching and sharing, she may or may not fully concur with Sunyata's expressions. Her focus is to encourage authentic growth and balanced spiritual comprehension. Sunyata acts as a free agent, and Apple is the facilitator. We endeavor to impart knowledge as clearly and accurately as we can. However, we do not guarantee the completeness nor the accuracy of the knowledge. We welcome all viewpoints, opinions, and beliefs and encourage respectful discourse and debate. Our goal is to create a safe place where all individuals can learn, thrive, and share. A big warm welcome to Sunyata. Sunyata draws on a lifetime of spiritual experiences and his 8.5 years of intense spiritual practice in India. He has explored a myriad of opportunities to expand the many pitfalls in accessing consciousness I am as the primary state, sahaja, and the like. His ongoing interest is to share with us the authentic knowledge, Jnana. Welcome, Sunyata. Perhaps share with us what's knowledge.
Well, thank you, Apple. Thank you for doing all this for me. I really very much appreciate it. Okay, so how is the easiest way to talk about an absolute? What is an absolute? What is absolute knowledge? What is absolute truth? That which is eternal, that never breaks down, that which is existent through all of the time, the same. So in the practice of Jnana, one's to identify exactly what these qualities are. Of course, the self is something positioned in time, and the mind is something positioned in time, and the body is something positioned in time. And all the opportunities in life are positioned in time. And all the experiences to be had are all time aspected, in that they come and go. They rise up and go away. So what we're looking toward is that underlies everything throughout, from the beginning of conscious life, as an infant, all the way to now in identifying who I am. Now, when I say who I am, I'm not interested in the self, the conditioned self, which was built from the emergence of consciousness. Usually for us, this happens in the age of early childhood, where we get our first grounding experiences, where we find ourselves with a dispositional set of values. And usually at the moment when this first conscious moment occurs, we're already loaded with a degree of knowledge which has set itself before us. So consciousness and the recognition of form has gone on before, but it gets to a point of critical mass where we can identify a happening. And so there'll be an experience that comes forward, which announces the self in relationship to the world and its relationship with others. And then the identified self begins. Now, as this moves along through time, all number of experiences happening. But for the child, in relationship to the parent and those elders and those perhaps older siblings and aunts and grandparents and teachers and all those about them, their job is to stabilize them in the world so that they can start preparing, first of all, to be safe, because of course children are naturally ignorant to the dangers of the world. They don't understand height. They don't understand the order of this world. That if you walk or run across a road, that there's cars. They don't understand all these things. So children have to be created in a way where they understand how to be safe for themselves. But along with that knowledge comes belief structures which have been inherited through the parents. And there's a good likelihood that those things inherited through the parents have been inherited through their parents and their circumstance. Now, these things might be based on wisdom, but they may not be. They may be just centered on a set of conventional beliefs which everyone's learned to agree upon, that creates a type of status quo by agreeing to them. But it doesn't really necessarily mean that we are existing in our functional, optimum, highest self. So these adjustments start coming through usually in teenage life. So there's a shift. So the attributes that we've learnt as a self are contrasted to these new experiences coming from different households and different states of belief, which are in conflict with the ones, not necessarily in conflict, marginally in conflict, maybe only a little bit in conflict with what, say, our own parents and the circumstance which we as a self grew up in as a child. And so there's a radical change. And these things happen through time. These happen into adult life, and they happen throughout our lives. Now, of course, there's circumstances of conflict between adults because no one is built out of the same conditioned form. Now, we call that our individuality. But in essence, that individuality pitched against another individual might create harmony and beauty and aesthetic beauty and ordered beauty. But on the other side, it may create intense conflict. So if we have an understanding toward this, then we'll recognize that it is our conditioning that has us hold this stance. Now, the values of which are true or not, and only introspection will have us understand this. Now, these things in Hindu knowledge are regarded as vasanas. Now, vasanas are those things learned or those things that have come up through the ancestral backdrop or the communal backdrop or the collective backdrop or the backdrop of a country state, which are manufactured over vast periods of time, which are the convenience of our livelihood and well-being, supposedly. But sometimes these things become so conflicted, they mean war and all number of strife. So then the introspection happens. Usually people don't come to the meditative state until they've gone through a degree of conflict in their life. If you're fortunate, you may have had a realization early, but you could be pretty certain that usually a person would have had to go through a conflicting circumstance which interrupted that conditioned self to be so. In other words, through illness or through the breakdown of an important relationship, perhaps an important love relationship, be it family, be it friends, be it loved ones. In this conflict, a level of introspection comes forward. Now, that introspection only happens if one's prepared to not blame the other, nor the circumstance, nor themselves, but to look at it very, very carefully and ask themselves what has happened. For the human being, it's very, very difficult to self-reflect at first. Now, this is why this is the first advent of spiritual practice. In Eastern philosophy, through Hinduism and through Buddhism, the process is deep introspection. One goes into meditation and starts looking very, very carefully at what the nature of things are. Now, here what we're looking for is truth, workability. Now, and we can come to this where a lot of people use meditation to feel okay, that maybe their emotional irks which have come up through the coalition and lack of workability between attributes within ourselves. Sometimes these attributes of the self aren't coalescing in love. There's a resentment between certain attributes within the self which break down as well. So you can see how convoluted this becomes. But fundamentally what we're looking for is what is consistently absolute truth as a foundation. Now, it takes a while to grasp this idea unless you've had a very, very profound breakdown, perhaps earlier in your life, before these structures have become more solidified. Because as we become more and more adult, we create investments within these structures. In other words, the nature of the self is organized in such a way where we get benefits from the way that we behave. Example would be the ambition of someone who's decided in their life they just want to become a multimillionaire. Well, that would entail perhaps maybe genius and incredible cleverness when it comes to creating facility for human beings, but it may come out of greed and manipulating and underhanded movements that have to do with taking from others what we're not entitled to. Now, these types of payoffs, particularly when you start building structures around yourself, are very, very difficult to come out of. I mean, that was Jesus's point when he spoke about it's harder for a rich man to pass through the eye of a needle. I remember the exact proverb. But the idea fundamentally is that you have to be able to shed your attachment to these things. So you can see the point that I'm getting at. We have to be very, very vigilant. And usually it will be a major breakdown that happens before we see this. Sadly, this isn't necessarily so. You don't need to come to this breakdown, but often people do need it to come to it. It's not necessary if you're in the company of good people. And I mean people who are really looking to understand what the absolute truth is. This is the meaning of the Sangha for the Buddhists. If you're in the company of good people, truly good people, then they'll encourage you toward this goodness and understanding this goodness. So does that give you a bit of a background to what we're looking at for knowledge?
Thank you very much, Sunyata, for gave us a comprehensive summary, if I'd say. My next question is, how is education associated with knowledge? What's the relationship between institutional education as we all go through the systematic education? Is that any relationship at all with this absolute truth?
Well, there's intense goodness that comes through humanity. And there's been many great arbiters and many deeply sound-minded beings whose intention is just love and goodness for their community. And because of this, these substructures are set up. And there's a foundational aspect which comes from love, the very fact that we're, as humans, we're mammalian beings who love the warmth of other humans, which means we love love. So love is very coercive. And love is very, very good if it's coercive toward the good. So many, many beautiful things come through the higher learnings that come through academic and social learnings. It's not to describe all these values. It's not to be rid of anything. It's not a rebellion. Jnana isn't a rebellion against common day knowledge. It's just having an understanding for perhaps where it may go wrong and for how to come out of that, how to liberate yourself from that.
So the acquired education from schools, they do play a role in having the desire to the highest knowledge at all?
They could be. I mean, unfortunately, with so much of what happens in the economic circumstance, and this is partially through what's become a type of normalized collective greed. The education system is geared more towards schooling. Schooling is like having a big heap of fish which you have to get from A to B, whereas education is something that's one-on-one. Personally, I think the old Renaissance way of the earlier aspects of the law of Manu before it got contaminated by the Kshatriya in India, which were the warrior class. The law of Manu is what we call the caste system, but it got transformed and changed when the warlords moved in on that. The law of Manu was actually a tribal law which had to do with eldership and how knowledge is passed down to everyone. So an elder had higher knowledge because of their experience through life, but everyone contributed to the common good of the tribe or the village. No one was exempt from work. Everyone contributed. When it was time to do a harvest, everyone would do the harvest. Whereas now what's happening is with the nuclear family, human beings have been isolated into these small units, and we don't have the communal strength that we once had, because with communal strength, we do in some places there's movement toward this, but say within a family context, for whoever it is that is doing the early child rearing, obviously there's a benefit that can be had with the cooperative organisation of a group of mothers or fathers who are looking after children, that they pull together, because 4 adults can look after 20 children and do it really richly. So that's perhaps in preschool, but really school should go on in a form where something similar goes on. And they do this in degrees by having a home teacher and then having teachers for the different fundamental disciplines that are the opportunities for young people to find work. There was a different process in India when it came to the law of Manu, because the elders were actually realized through the development of eldership and spiritual practice, because it was also part of that life that one went into higher meditation, into understand. As you get older, you're more organized, so you can afford to do this. In India, people get past their householder life and they go to sannyas. This is the ashrama system is really still intact. It's a little bit fractionated because there's so many different cultures in India, but this system of itself means that with this higher knowledge, as the younglings come in and the infants come in, the elders can really clearly see what the dispositions of the younglings are, so they can direct them to be under the tutelage of certain masters. And by putting them in those places where their disposition is satisfied by, because children are lovely little things. Children like to cooperate. Children, there's all this thing about children shouldn't work and things. That's nonsense. I used to do lots of work when I was a little child, and there's nothing wrong with it. And so we would be positioned in helping a master out. We might sweep the floors and go and get them coffee and go and buy extra drawing paper and pens and the like, whatever your disposition. And what you subsequently do is you learn the craft of what these people do. So I'm very much into early, what you would call apprenticeship under masters. I think that should be the way that education is. And people don't think this way. They think about expense. But the moment you start doing that, then you get schooling. So you get a mass of children are all put in, and then the higher learners, which are usually the ones aren't necessarily the most intelligent, but they're the ones who more readily learn through rote, you see. So if we get into these social structures, then the absence goes to these other children who miss out on the early education because they don't have an interest in the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic. that isn't there. They might be more visually based. I was an artist all the way through. And it wasn't that I couldn't comprehend or conceptually grasp things. In fact, I could see it from a multivarious point of view. But the education was such where you had to form down this little line. Now, children are much more intelligent than that, far more intelligent than that, given the opportunity. So I'm a little bit contentious about that, but maybe that's a little bit to a side to what we're sort of talking about with jhana. Unfortunately, what happens in our structures and systems is we come through our early development, and by the time we get into our middle 20s, we've taken on a vocation and we go, okay, this is this. And if we're lucky, we've sort of pitched something close to what that love is that we want to do. But many young people have been so confounded by the education system or feels that they're inadequate to do certain things, so they dismiss them at the age of 7, which is way too premature. They're too young to do that. But this might be a pet love, and this might be exactly where the self is growing up to give its highest purpose. Then if that person is fortunate enough to come into spiritual practice in an early life, and I mean an active one, like meditation, or the Eastern processes, Buddhism, Hinduism, perhaps Buddhism's a little bit easier to think toward for the Western mind. I tend to favour Hinduism, but I'll go into that a little bit later on. Then say if you come into this in an early life, then you could start self-initiating. And if you're fortunate enough to meet a teacher at such a young age, now this is another disadvantage we have because we don't have recognisably, dare I say, enlightened teachers. And so we have to ask, what is an enlightened teacher? It's someone who realizes the values of the teacher. So, if this is a discipline of whatever, it's not necessarily in meditation. The meditation for someone who aspires to something in life might not be the absolute aspiration for them. It might be first more important to position that person in their right livelihood, if you see what I mean, because once they've got that, then they can build the life according which is natural to their disposition. And these are really, really important. Not everyone has to become a nun or a monk. That's not the point. Some may choose that, but they're very, very rare. And they're usually the ones who will be the spiritual teachers. And you can see this. It's really quite obvious. Unless people think that there's a racket in it or something, and then they'll get into all types of nonsense. But that's another story.
So, in your knowledge, what are the challenges in our current society we face to obtain this highest knowledge as a society as a whole?
All adults have to be very, very honest with themselves. They have to ask the question, do they know? They have to ask, this is Ramna, it's asking this question, who am I? Who am I? Now, of course, what will people will do is they'll give you their name, they'll give you their job criteria, they'll give you whatever attributes and their abilities that they think they're good at. But this is not what Ramana is talking about, because he's pitching this against what we call absolute truth. What he's asking is, who am I that is eternally so? Who am I that is eternally so? And you go, well, to say that outright to a person is going to completely stun them, shock them, because people don't even know where to look. But what if it's present there in you all the time? If it's eternal and it's of you, eternal, your eternal I nature beyond the self of accumulated attributes, then if it's pitched in eternity, then it has to be here now. There's no time that it's not been here. So this brings us to a special focus. Now, this is not something we do with little children. What we want, because the children have to ground themselves in what it is to be in life. But those children need to be surrounded by enlightened beings in their parents and their teachers and their. So it's up to the adults to do this, to understand what this is. So we have this huge fabrication around what enlightenment is.
Back to your first sentence, you mentioned that we adults need to be honest. However, what I've noticed is that when they come to this spiritual journey, they fear to be honest.
Yeah.
Don't know how to be honest. So where do you see the root of the problem is?
Oh, it's terrifying because, see, these are the vasanas. So what's happened is it might be the material that we've learned through the course of our life, in that certain things happen in our life, and we build aversions towards certain ways of being, and we build attachment to certain ways of being. So Gautama Buddha was right in pointing out these qualities. Now, this looks all to be good. And from an innocent point of view, when we talk about attachment, usually attachment is in that we recognize that we love. So that there's certain actions that we find in ourselves that we love. Like a person will say, I love you. Well, when a person says, I love you, what's actually happening? They're actually recognizing in that person attributes which they're in accord with. I love them. It doesn't mean they're necessarily of that, but there's something of the quality of that which they recognize about themselves, throughout themselves, that they love in that other. When someone says, I love me, myself loves art, and that little child has always been here. So he has constantly been obsessed by it. So he's totally attached to making art. Now, this is totally harmless, but it wouldn't be harmless if I neglected my children. I'd have to balance myself. So when I was in family life, my responsibility was to make sure that my children were okay first, and then I could get to these other special interests that I have. I don't let these things override. So we balance these things out. But in the more heinous aspect, the vasanas, which are a little bit more negative, I'll say, they might be sort of built through a desire that something happened, like you were a little child and your parents were really impoverished, and you said, and something happened at some time, and there was just this small thing that you wanted, and your parents couldn't provide it, and there was so much resentment built in that moment that you swore that you would never let this happen to you in your adult life. So at that point, you become a commitment to, say, being prosperous. Now, there's nothing wrong with being prosperous. That's all fine. But it might expand itself to a point where it's excessive greed, and you decide that you don't care how you get money. You'll tread over anyone. You might not steal, but you'll manipulate things. And you can be so much caught up in that vasana that when it comes to the meditation, you can't sit. You'll be driven to constantly go back to that because you can't face that self. But that self isn't you. That's just the lesser self with its attributes which has been built. That isn't who you are. You have to be able to make that clear distinction. But people are terrified of making that distinction when they've got this investment around the self-created of attributes. They're terrified of it. They're terrified of it. That's what, like, I can remember when I was 26, being given a small book on Gautama Buddha, and it was the the eight-way path. Is that what it is? The eight-way path, and sort of the right living, and all these. And I went through this, and I went to myself, and I wasn't prepared to give up certain things. And I was being a scallywag, that's for sure. I wasn't being honest with myself. And so I delayed my own development. Delayed my own development. And I can see that in hindsight. I wasn't ready to give up on certain things. But interestingly enough, the things that I thought that I was actually, the things I was fearful of giving up weren't the things that I had to give up anyway. I had no idea of what it was to be free of those vasanas. I was so caught up in those vasanas that they were ruling me. That self-form was ruling me. My authentic self was over here somewhere, and it was in suffering, because you can't, the whole point of jnana and Advaita Vedanta, or Advaita just means non-duality, which is what jhana comes out of, is the practice of coming beyond duality. So that duality happens between the authentic self and this constructed self. Here we have these two, and these are in agitation with one another. This is why it's very, very hard. And this is why often the teacher or the healer is very important, because the healer can help share. If the healer is very much connected in the higher jhana and understands the higher jhana, then that purification has the healer be able to work with this submatter to be able to help that individual cleanse without them feeling threatened, so they can shed material subtly until they can develop enough strength to make those steps, because there are a number of steps to take. And then eventually they'll come close to an authentic teacher. And when they come to an authentic teacher, when they've dropped enough vasanas, are prepared to do that further work, just go that little bit further to finish it. Usually those individuals, by the time they come to that stage, it's not so hard. It's not so hard. There's resistance for sure. And it's good resistance. It's probably the most vigilant hanging on. But it's not that hard, because they're already gone. And the moment they walk into the company of a master or a true teacher, they're finished. It's just a question of, they're finished. It's done. It's a certainty. It's a certainty. It's done. It's just
You
like
mentioned the word Vasana a few times. Could you please explain what a Vasana means?
Vasanas are the accumulated dross of erroneous thinking, which causes attachment to the wrong ways of living and being. So vasanas can come from parents too. They can come up through ancestral lines. We can learn
desires, wishes, expectations.
Yes, and we have to be able to sort of sort through this thing very, very carefully. This is where meditation is really good, because I think a lot of the fears we have, it's not so much that we have to, there's no reason why a layperson or a householder can't be totally realized. And they can still have a wife or a husband. This isn't children, and this isn't an issue. You don't have to become a monk to have this. It's just that the monk and nun type just like it too much, they end up, just going that way. It's just, and because all that is beloved isn't enough for just your family. Beloved is everyone. You see, beloved is everyone, everything actually. Beloved is everything.
And now that we are talking about the knowledge, we are breaking down the authentic truth, the ultimate truth. How would this highest knowledge, understanding about consciousness, could help us to create a better society?
First, we have to establish ourselves there and give it a holiday in trying to fix the world. Have a bit of a holiday. I mean, like if you're a healer or you're working for the ecology or something, well, that's your job. So, that's what you're doing, and that's all perfectly good because that's all set up to be. So you just carry on. And, like if it has to do with very, very simple things, so managing your recycling or, the simple, nice things that we can do, well, we can all do that, can't we? That's But for, people they want to save the world, this type of thing. It's probably better to go, first of all, and get absolute clarity in the self. This is first learn how to understand exactly who I is. And when I say who I mean this as I is consciousness. I is beyond mind. I is beyond body. Self is the body-mind. Self is the body-mind world filled with attributes. Self is that which moves things about to make them right or wrong. See, so we remove ourselves from that, even if it's just for a portion of time. Sadhana, meditation, sadhana, isn't necessarily just formal sitting, although formal sitting is needed for those when they're ready and come to it. But as you know in your own experience, it takes time to come to a proper sadhana. It takes time, like you've got a certain level of revelations and realizations, and then all of a sudden it starts happening. And then all of a sudden it clicks through and you see what might occur as higher mindfulness or more abundant love, or it might be just light, emanating light. It can be a number of things that can happen, and these things can happen very, very quickly. And once you come to sadhana, then it's something else again. But sadhana doesn't necessarily have to mean formal sitting. Sadhana is something that it is mindfulness, but it's not the mind. It's actually consciousness. I think there's a distinction. I'm not in agreement about mindfulness. I think I can understand that it's useful to call it mindfulness because for the collective mind, generally, this is a good way of being, the collective mind. But we're consciousness. Mind is just an attribute. But that is a revelation that needs to happen in sadhana. You have to be able to see this. People think that consciousness is mind. No. Consciousness precedes mind. The argument scientifically is that, well, it's of the mind. No, it's the bridge. Even if they identify it, I think they identify it at the base of the hypothalamus where certain chemicals are released at the base of the mind, in the hypothalamus, I think. and certain secretions of chemicals come forward for us to perceive. But this is only perception. That's only that aspect of consciousness. Consciousness is the bridge for that which is beyond consciousness. There is a beyond, but now we're talking about something far more advanced. And that's where we get the serious meditator. Once we get the sadhaka, that person who's committed to meditation, then that's when we go in and start very much exploring the different levels of jnana. And jnana are level, if you like, level developments of awareness for how the nature of consciousness, because consciousness has levels to. It's hard to talk about this, but there's levels in consciousness where the apperception, because consciousness doesn't see, that's the faculties of the body mind. Consciousness apperceives. You can see this in the way that you speak. If you watch very, very carefully when you're in a very, very clear dialogue, you don't know where this thing is emanating. It's just emanating out of consciousness. And all these things are very, very particular. You're not sitting there going, you could sort of say, well, this is just second knowledge or something. But that's an oversimplification. It's, like, okay, it's through rote. I've learned how much to do it that, I can play my instrument like this and I can be having a conversation with someone like this. And two things can be happening like that. That's consciousness. That's beyond mind because there's no thinking in it at all. There's no thought in it at all. It's just happening. It's just coming out. And someone positions the question, it just comes out. This is the beauty of authentic. When the conviction of being consciousness shifts to being an absolute certainty that I'm consciousness. So once it shifts to that certainty, this is, and here we go into something else here. Then I want to talk about the bhava, the conviction. But then that's another area.
Yes, there'll be unlimited, discussions. We can extend and expand beyond what we already know. Perhaps if I may share what my understanding is towards this, the benefit towards us in what is applicable to build a harmonious society. I guess this is many people out there with this righteousness, this beautiful divine intention to help each other. Perhaps the first and for the most important tasks, if I may call it tasks or responsibility, is to truly understand what we are, what this body is, and what this body is actually capable of.
Yeah, body. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Body. Yeah, well, that's right. But that doesn't stop. See, that's all fine. All these beautiful things, because as the vasanas drop away, then all these attributes of love that you've always had will be there. They're not going to disappear. If you love painting or you love doing this and you love doing that, that's going to all be there. Nothing's going to disappear. If you love a husband or a wife or you love your children, that's all going to be there. If you've got the opportunity to sort of do and be of those things, it's going to be all fine. But if it's not authentic, then those things disappear. If it's built out of vasanas and it's just something you're doing out of rote or convention and you're not being authentic to the self, then they'll fall away. You see? It's like that. You can't lose the authentic self. And even the self with attributes becomes more divine. Because the self with attributes is also God. I've said that word. People don't like using that word. But the self is always also God. The little self is also God. It's a child of God.
I
You know?
think it's important we foster authentic free speech, freedom, and just
Oh, absolutely.
be
Yeah.
ourselves. And God is another topic that we could have another
Well,
episode.
when I say that, let me just qualify that. What I mean is that highest aspect that we understand to be the um, um, homogenizing force, which sees that there's a unified, conscious, uh, unitary conscious, what I was using the other word, unitary conscious form that we are unified together. And but I know the moment you say God, people put a name to it. This is, you get into the monotheistic or the pantheistic idea, which for me, I don't have any real problem with. But the issue is that there's always an argument, particularly with monotheistic religion, because monotheistic religion will argue they're God. But the thing is, in those commandments, which are Abrahamic and also follow the law of Moses, well, one of the decrees of the Ten Commandments is, well, thou shalt not utter the ineffable name of God. The ineffable name is God. No human being can define God. That's a point. Now, that's in conflict with, say, how the Hindus work it, because the Hindus sort of work more on the level of, without putting this down, more on the level of archetypes. It's probably easier for the Western mind to recognize the pantheistic aspect of Hinduism and those religions which are pantheistic. They're articulations of the potential of what it is for humanness to be in its highest. That's what they are, the representations of it. And so, I can honor that, and I can honor the monotheistic, as long as we're not going to be violent with one another. As long as we give one another.
There could be many different kinds of explanation towards this word God. My understanding,
Yeah, it's like love.
Yes, in my spiritual healing understanding or learning, we call that the collective intelligence. But then there's another level beyond this collective intelligence, which is where the void level, the nothingness level comes from. Or perhaps there's another level beyond that we could just discuss on that.
Where it's there's this expanded thing, and you just go, whoa, that we just call it that.
And
it's so beautiful. That
wonderful. I'm curious to know, where does the desire of the knowledge come from?
Yeah, well, that is really intriguing. You know it. It's there as a foundation. It's there when we were small children. The backdrop of it is there. I can recognize it. And the more that I've gone in to deeper sadhana and recognizing the beauty of this, my experience of time shifts. So that first memory that I had, say, at 3.5, which was a really formative experience, but what was sitting behind it, and I've mentioned this to you before, was just sheer wonderment. There was already a knowability, and there was already an intelligence which was coming through that wonderment, which had already recognized all number of cognitive responses, because by the time the self came to that critical mass to be able to say, this is a conscious experience that's happening, which defines a certain moment as my first thought. There was a lot more conscious development that happened before that. So why was that the tipping point where all of a sudden that came together and it formed an identity which was distinctly something other than that vast wonderment that was perfectly okay, perfectly functional, perfectly loving, perfectly connected, perfectly listening, perfectly somewhat sort of naturally compliant, understood the directives of the adults. All these types of things were there prior to these first experiences because there was a judgment of it. So it's consistently through us all the time. But that doesn't mean that it's infantile. There's another thing here too, Apple, which is really, really interesting. And I'm a little bit cautious about saying it, but there is an evolutional aspect to this too. So as we're collectively all coming into this, the potential is, as we know, because we say, you go, well, imagine if we had 100,000 enlightened beings. Well, there probably is 100,000 enlightened beings. There might be more enlightened beings here. There might be more. So what's the critical mass that could possibly bring us around? Because it's becoming more and more obvious to us if we tune into, the news or something, or all the dramas, the horrors that are going on in the world. You look at the political leaders in the world at this time, they look like school children. They look like they're adolescent, the way they behave. Not all of them, but many of them. And you go, like, this isn't very good, because they have a lot of power, and, perhaps these people, but anyway, and that's politics. But, but if there's this potential of critical mass for what it would actually mean for humanity, because children do have it, unless they're very cruelly brought up, very, very cruelly, which sadly many children are, sadly, but many children aren't either. And it doesn't take much love for us to sort of be loving beings. What do you think?
You said that this consciousness happened before the body has been manifested. So
I'm not sure about that. That one I can't say. I think there's. I know we've got the past life recall and all these things that do come and look. And I've had this, but in taking it in deeper and looking at it, I see it as like a collective recall more than a personal timeline. So there's something in the matter of it which brings things forward because they're animating, they're telling you something about what your present circumstances. So you all of a sudden get a recall of what looks like a past life, and you're traveling with someone. Maybe you've got a lover or something, or something, an intimate relationship of closeness, and then all of a sudden you get what looks like past life recall, and you see something there, and you go, "What's that?" And often, as this happened for me, I don't know how it's happened for you, but as it happened for me, it animated the circumstance really accurately. And in a way, many times it was actually warning me about things, which I neglected, by the way, because I didn't know how to read it, because I was believing it just as a past. So I saw it as being, okay, that was the past life. Now here's the opportunity to change. But it's something different. So I don't know. I don't have any real, I can't say that I have recognition of what looks like past life, but I can't be certain that that is true. The imagination can get too easily played out, and it's more than that. I think for the way that the psychic body works, it reads things on emotive levels to be able, because it's part of our facility. See, the astral is from the nada down, the lower nada down. So it has to do with our survival mechanism and our intimate relationships, because most of our intimate relationships aren't formed from the heart. For many people, they're actually formed from the stomach, the solar plexus. And it doesn't, like you don't have to do oodles of kundalini to think about what that might mean. Because if it's coming from those chakras or even just that physical body center, all the organs are brains in themselves. This is Gurdjieff's thinking. So what's stomach? It's survival and certainty and security. So why are our nadas connected with those people that we call our loved ones? Well, it's usually mother, father, maybe siblings. Yes, siblings, because they're part of that net. Relationships, if you have strong domestic relationship, often through sexuality, these bonds happen. Whether you think it's, people say to me, free sex. I'm not really sure. I don't believe in that idea. Sort of like free sex, because it's too bonding. I'm doing the male thing. This is what the male does. The male comes in this way, and what he does is he meets the consciousness of the feminine. And if you're prepared, as a man, you have to be prepared to meet the feminine consciousness in all its fullness. But how many men go around doing that? Too many.
So in understanding that is this collective recall happened before this body came to existence, and consequently, as this body being manifested, and then there's ongoing collective happening, collective consciousness.
No, but you have to look at something else here. When most people's first conscious memory, I know people do rebirthing and we see ourselves getting born out of a yoni or something. But if you look at your first conscious recall, it's usually around 2.5. It might be a vague something if there's something really horrendous, but pre-language, it's not pre-language. Most of our consciousness gets built out of our ability to have language. So these things come in synchronistically, at the age of 2.5, 3. Most people's first memories come in there. So consciousness comes then. Consciousness isn't happening before. So you sort of say, well, it is. We see it in a baby. They're aware of things. All right. So there's a degree of consciousness happening, but it's not the consciousness of recognition. It's a consciousness of sort of floundering and trying to work out what to do. It's just part of a facility in the body. And the consciousness does come out of the body. I mean, it's not an easy thing to accept. It's a very hard thing to accept because we've been conditioned to think that what we're looking at is eternal soul. Now, I'm not negating that, the eternal aspect, but I would say that it's not in consciousness. And then you go, well, what can it be? Well, you're going to have to look at that very carefully. You've got to take that into sadhana because it's the only way to access it. And that will come through the higher jhanas because you usually hit like infinite light in the 6th jhana, and the 7th jhana will be infinite consciousness or space, infinite space consciousness, right? So there's an awareness of vast everything through without, and then there's a shift that happens, and these can last for months or weeks or days for some, but usually the most the quickest way you can come through these is week at least, not more. You need at least a month or 6 weeks in each of these states to be able to really comprehend them. When I say comprehend them, totally relax into them. And because you're also watching how it affects the mind, disappears at this point. And the body is there, but it only will, the survival element will come through, like hunger will push the body to eat and to urinate and even to wash. The body has a certain survival movement that it does. But then once we move beyond the infinite light into the consciousness, which is also still infinite light throughout, and then there's an inversion, and that's where it goes to infinite nothingness, which is sublime. I mean, it sounds terrifying to a lot of people, but it's so sublime. It's void, and like you sit in these spaces, and still, interestingly enough, after 3-4 days, the body will get up, and and there'll be times where you get up and have a wee or something, or or eat some banana or oat cookie or something. If you have this opportunity, this is why I'd like to do ashrama, actually, because then you could support people. But Vipassana is good. Vipassana. But I think Vipassana is perhaps a little bit harsh. It's a little bit too militant. I think the way that it works when it comes to the higher jhanas, it's actually better just to be able to relax into it. Just really relax into it. So you need the space and place. I guess it could happen. Asana. I guess it would happen. Asana, because you could just disappear into your room. There'd be nothing that would stop you from doing that. Once you've gone past the anapanasati, you're pretty much on your way, aren't you, in Vipassana? And it's about the rigid sitting. Well, see, I don't really buy that. I think once you've got a fairly strong sadhana, the rigid sitting isn't important anymore. You can do it anyway. And you'll do it every way, like it's happening now. It can only be disrupted by mind.
So back to the question, is the recognition of consciousness an accident?
No, it's part of the organism of how this beingness is. I mean, what is it to be human? Well, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. Positioned like this, and it should be celebrated. It should be cherished. It should be revered. It should be loved. It should be honored. You should be doing lots of dancing, celebrating. We should worship the beingness. Intense gratitude toward beingness. No, it's divine. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. It's a miracle.
What's the mechanism that promotes these miracles happening?
What has promoted this miracle to happen? I don't know. I don't know. I can't say that. I can't say. Because there it is. You get the sense of timelessness. I don't see an end to it. Like, there's no end to it. There's no birth or death. I have no recognition of birth. And I don't, will I know death? You know, the organism might die, but, you know, like, and even the consciousness might go, but there's more to it because I sit behind the consciousness. I is there. It's not, I is not even awareness. I is not even awareness. No, I isn't consciousness. But, you know, like, so how do you go, well, how can you say that without consciousness? It's apperceived. It just is, because you know that you're everywhere there situated within consciousness, like you are everywhere situated within anything where your focus is. You're everywhere throughout it, in every way. So, you know, we play the game of saying how many fingers am I holding up from 3,100 kilometers away? You know, oh, you know, why don't I know rocket science? It's all this type of thing, but that's just the mind. That's just the mind. And that's just the mind and the body. And I know that sort of sounds like an excuse and a way of sort of kicking out of it, but you just have to explore it and take it into its depth. Just take it into its depth. Just take it into, because you'll pass through all these fields anyway, and everything's delightful. You don't have to have, once you get to the point of self-realization and realize that the self of attributes isn't the self I am. And first we ground ourselves in consciousness I am, and that's very important. We ground ourselves in consciousness, and there's a reason for doing this, because that's our most aware, our most pronounced aware attribute. It's an attribute, but it's our most aware attribute. So we use that to its fullest extent, to go out to its furthest extremities, and understand that, or apperceive that, see what that is. And
my humble observation of my humble understanding in getting into this, perhaps go back to the question or the curiosity of where I am actually from. If this isn't an accident and your notion of part of the organism and the beingness, so what I thought, this might be something just quite random, and it's a natural evolvement of the consciousness, if this may be making sense at all.
yes, I agree. No, I agree with you there. I think there is an evolution in consciousness going on too, as there is all levels. I mean, look, if you were to see what bodies were when I was a child, it's remarkably different. And it's not just an aesthetic thing. The levels of health of just, like, it's just the development, the prosperity in the world now. It's astonishing. It's astonishing. But people don't appreciate it. I mean, yeah, I know there's horrible wars and there's famine, but all this is unnecessary. All of it. It's all because of greed and politics and greed, and war. And there is a little bit of evil here. And, look, and I go like this, tish, 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 and you go, just what do we do with that? But outside of that, there's this expansive level where there's been incredible development, and we should be celebrating. All this division between countries at the moment is stupid. And they do it on the basis of trade. It's all around money organization and people's wealth and greed. That's what it is. It's all just a suspended element of greed. But anyway, won't get into politics. Because you get waylaid by it, you get brought down, and then you're in here. It's not to neglect it. I'm aware of it. But I just go, well, no, look, we have to just keep on purifying. Because, look, if all of a sudden, and I've said this to a friend before, and we go, there was the us and them conversation. There's us and there's them. Well, I guarantee that the one in his penthouse is isolated in his own form, going through the same human suffering that anyone does. You know what I mean? There's only a certain limit the power does, and you can have all the wealth in the world, but it doesn't mean anything when it comes down to it. Doesn't. So money or acquisitions or status or fame, I mean, what do all these things mean? I mean, you get yourself a name in a book or something. What does it mean?
Many of us get caught up with this infinite desires of material comfort, which is in essence a part of where the human sufferings come from.
And it's foolish because, like if you opened yourself up just to your natural creativity, you'd be so opulent anyway. We're so opulent. We're so opulent. And, like even if we live a humble life, like it's a beautiful life. And, like if you're sort of mad, crazy artist like I am, I create so much resource. The money system doesn't work for me. All this that I'm creating is just for my culture. But I'm doing it for myself. Like this is my my little self doing its child game through its whole life. But in the end, it's just a gift to this place. It's not about fame or accruing great wealth or something. It's just doing the exercise of creativity. And just to encourage that,
So come back to practice. What are the tips that you have for our audience to expand on their understanding of consciousness?
Certain literature is good. I think, like exposing yourself to certain writings, and certainly certain masters really have their finger on it. We tend to sort of look at a lot of people these days have gotten into the hatha yoga, which is wonderful, good for body health and everything. I used to do a very, very strong Iyengar yoga, but I stopped when I went into India, interestingly enough. But these are all fantastic things to do. Like Iyengar, I met Iyengar in Pune, and he was 94, and he was like he had big cow eyes, and he was beautiful. He was beautiful, and he's this high exponent of Iyengar yoga, and wonderful and lovely man, gorgeous man, beautiful man. Okay, so there's that. That's wonderful. The benefits of having a healthy body is great, and that's sort of one step. But you need to move up into the knowledge yoga. What knowledge is. So you get to a point where you started taking a natural interest. I'd suggest looking into people like Ramana. Ramana is a good one. He's a little softer. He's a jhana master. He's a jhani. Nisargadatta is a jhani. Who else would I regard? I spent a lot of time around the Oshos, sannyasins, and I actually I ran with a sannyasini for about 3.5 years, and that was wonderful, very, very interesting. But anyway, I think Osho's work was to bring out a lot out quickly into the world, and he appealed to a lot of people's lustiness and desire for things. But I've tended to sort of go and past that quickly. I could see the inherent issues in it. The Ramana is one of the pure masters. I think Nisargadatta is there. Papaji is quite an interesting orator. He's quite who is his Muji. Muji is lovely. I know Muji well. And I was there in Arunachala when he was there, and we used to meet often and give one another a hug. He'd have this huge following of young people following everywhere. It was quite gorgeous. So there's good teachers, and I think you just have to expose yourself to the knowledge. The Rebal Gita is a beautiful writing to read. There's the transcription that came out of the Ramana Ashram is very, very special in understanding the mind. Perhaps these things need to be coupled with meditation. So, I'd encourage people to find a good meditation teacher. Look very, very carefully. Who could I qualify? I mean, we'll try to do it online. We'll do more and more online as we go along, and we'll see how that works. So that will come up. But look for anyone who is in your community who's doing spiritual work, and you'll get a feeling for it. Be in the company of good people, and do as much practice as you think you can. When I say practice, I mean sadhana, meditation. Some people find it hard at first to come into meditation. We'll talk about that more as we get along. I think maybe we should devote some sessions for that particularly. Maybe next time we can go into that in detail, right? Go into different processes. What's something that I can suggest for the shorthand? Or just
Perhaps
simply to
some changes that you think might be appropriate for organizations, institutes, and some of the prominent leaders out there that may be conducive to promote a harmonious world.
I think we need to be communicating and pointing out those facilities that are open to one another. I mean, if you've got an environment I think we need to support those people who open their homes or create a facility for, create meditation spaces, with donations and the like, do this type of thing, because that's what happens throughout India and Asia. What happens is, people give their offerings. So we support for spaces to manifest. So if we have practitioners, or like your own circumstance, your space is beautiful. So, those people who come to share in your space, perhaps if they can, be thoughtful enough to leave small donations just to help things keep on going. And, that's just support one another and communicate for where there's authentic meditation going on, and there is, as we know, and encourage everyone to know, spread the word.
Is there anything from an organizational level, institutional level, that you think might be appropriate to suggest them to do or incorporate in their organizational culture?
Do you mean like to fix themselves to a particular type of learning? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sort of organizational program, and what sort of notions the leaders from those institutions they need to be aware of, as our audience is broad and they may come forward and watch this video. So I thought maybe we have some 1 or 2 tips they could take away.
All right. Okay. Well, with meditation, would you like me to give a few techniques? You think, is that what you're suggesting, or am I pointing at places and spaces to go?
Say an organization, a
Yes.
school, a bank, they kind of are now into this spiritual learning or curious or quest. How can they incorporate this spiritual understanding to create a healthier culture?
Well, I think this is why we're coming out like we're doing. Let's start getting organized to talk about this properly, because I think here, there's there's obviously a lot of good things that are happening here. And the hatha yoga is fantastic, but we have to realize that's physical health. The basic meditation that comes from that is all well and good. The more expanded levels, things like Vipassana is pretty heavy for a lot of people. And it takes a bit for a lot of people to work up to something like a Vipassana. So it would be better to look to who's in your vicinity, because I think a sangha, a body of people who are actually there working on meditation, to join those people and be part of what they're doing, is going to strengthen your practice. And, when we agree into it, this is a good idea. And people always will have advice for you. And you can pick and choose. And if it works for you, then it works for you. And if it doesn't work for you, that's all right. There's more opportunities that will come forward. And, perhaps we can talk about this a little bit more. I mean, online. I'd like to be able to set up programs with us here so that we can go into particular types of meditation processes and just devote, say, 45 minutes of pure meditation online. That might be a really nice thing to do, just to support it, because that certainly worked last week when we went into it. That was beautiful, what was going on there just between the three of us. So, and if we could encourage people to come and join us, that would be really lovely. So maybe you could promote something here on our side so that we can come together for anyone who's, found us and wants to join in. That would be lovely. Let's do that, and get used to what this medium is, and then maybe have a share for where people have breakthroughs and also maybe obstacles, and just talk through what those are. This is all really good because this helps everyone come through quickly, not just for the group that we might be sharing it with, but for those people who might be tuning in to it, which is excellent. Yeah, because I think quickly, even something like this, people will cotton on what's going on and they'll know how to use it. Just tune in to where we are. It's nice and easy.
Lots of opportunities and lots of ideas that are manifesting itself as the consciousness mature its existence in these human bodies. And this has been wonderful, Sunyata. I wanted to thank you for your generosity and sharing your knowledge and wisdom. I'm sure the audience is going to love it.
Thanks, love. Yeah, thank you for supporting all of this. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it.
For those you wanted to know more about Sunyata, please watch our episode 1 Sahaja, which I gave a full introduction of Sunyata. And as we explore and produce more episodes, we will have more in-depth understanding about Sunyata's journey. If you wanted to book a one-to-one session with Sunyata, please use the link in the description box. And by all means, please share this episode, share the knowledge, and leave a comment. If there is a particular topic that you are interested to learn from Sunyata, please leave us a comment or email me.
Yes.
We thank you for watching. And once again, thank you, Sunyata, for your precious time. Love and light to all. See you in the next episode.